The morning sun cast long shadows across the courthouse steps as Marcus Williams adjusted his military dress uniform one final time. The Bronze Star medal pinned to his chest caught the light, a reminder of the day he saved 3 fellow soldiers from a burning Humvee in Afghanistan. Today should have been different. Today was supposed to be about justice, about standing up for what was right in his own community. Marcus had returned to his hometown of Millfield 6 months ago, hoping to find peace after 2 tours of duty overseas. Instead, he found a community divided by the same prejudices he thought he had left behind. The local police department had been targeting young black men with unnecessary stops and searches, and when Marcus witnessed Officer Bradley rough up his teenage nephew Jerome for simply walking home from basketball practice, he knew he had to act. The courthouse lobby buzzed with morning activity as lawyers, clerks, and citizens moved about their business. Marcus felt the familiar weight of eyes upon him as he walked through the metal detector. Some glances showed respect for his uniform. Others held the same suspicious looks he had grown accustomed to since childhood in this small southern town. "First time in court, soldier boy?" sneered Officer Bradley as he passed by in the hallway. The same officer who had shoved Jerome against a patrol car for no reason other than being in the wrong place with the wrong skin color. Marcus kept his composure, remembering his military training about maintaining discipline under pressure. Judge Harrison Whitmore entered courtroom 3B with the authority of someone who had presided over this domain for 23 years. His reputation preceded him through every corner of Millfield. Known for his harsh sentences and little tolerance for what he considered troublemakers, Judge Whitmore ran his courtroom with an iron fist. The American flag stood proudly behind his bench, yet Marcus wondered if the justice it represented would truly be blind today. The courtroom filled with familiar faces from the community. Mrs. Henderson from the corner store sat in the gallery, her worried expression showing support for Marcus while revealing her own fears about speaking out against injustice. Jerome sat with his mother Sarah, Marcus's sister, both of them hoping that someone would finally listen to their story about police harassment that had become all too common in their neighborhood. As the morning progressed, Marcus watched case after case unfold before Judge Whitmore's bench. Each defendant seemed to receive predetermined judgments based more on appearance than evidence. A young white college student caught with marijuana received community service and a stern warning about making better choices. Minutes later, a black teenager facing similar charges received 6 months probation and a lecture about personal responsibility that lasted longer than the actual trial. When Marcus's case was finally called, he stood with military precision and approached the bench. The charges were simple: filing a complaint against Officer Bradley for excessive force and harassment. What should have been a straightforward civil matter had somehow escalated into multiple court appearances and legal complications that seemed designed to discourage him from pursuing justice. "Mr. Williams," Judge Whitmore began, his voice carrying the weight of authority and barely concealed irritation, "I see you've decided to make quite a spectacle of yourself in my community." The judge's eyes swept over Marcus's uniform with what appeared to be disdain rather than respect. "That fancy medal doesn't give you special privileges in my courtroom." Marcus felt the familiar surge of anger that had carried him through combat zones, but he channeled it into controlled determination. "Your Honor, I'm simply seeking justice for my nephew and accountability for Officer Bradley's actions. The evidence clearly shows excessive force was used during a routine encounter." The gallery murmured softly as community members watched this confrontation between their decorated veteran and their longtime judge. Many had witnessed similar scenes over the years, but few had seen someone stand so firmly against Judge Whitmore's intimidating presence. "Evidence?" Judge Whitmore scoffed, shuffling through papers on his desk. "I see a troublemaker who can't adjust to civilian life and wants to cause problems for our dedicated law enforcement officers. Officer Bradley has served this community faithfully for 8 years. Marcus reached for his briefcase, the same one his law school professors had given him upon graduation 3 years ago. Few people in Millfield knew about his legal education, completed through correspondence courses during his military service. He had planned to practice law after his military career ended, but recent events had accelerated that timeline considerably. Your Honor, Marcus said calmly. I have documented evidence including witness statements, photographs of my nephew's injuries, and security camera footage from the incident location. The law clearly states that citizens have the right to file complaints against law enforcement officers when constitutional violations occur. Judge Whitmore's expression darkened as he realized this young veteran was not going to be easily intimidated or dismissed. The courtroom atmosphere grew tense as spectators sensed the escalating conflict between these two men who represented different views of justice and authority in their community. Mr. Williams, the judge said slowly, his voice dropping to a threatening whisper, I find you in contempt of court for your disrespectful attitude and inappropriate military display in my courtroom. That medal you're wearing so proudly has no bearing on civilian legal proceedings. The words hit the courtroom like a thunderclap. Several people gasped audibly while others shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Mrs. Henderson covered her mouth in shock, while Sarah grabbed Jerome's hand tightly, both of them understanding that they were witnessing something that would change their community forever. Marcus stood perfectly still, his military training keeping his exterior calm, while his mind raced through legal precedents and constitutional protections. He had faced enemy fire in Afghanistan, but this moment felt just as dangerous for different reasons. This was about more than one court case or one corrupt officer. This was about the soul of justice itself in a community that had forgotten its founding principles. Furthermore, Judge Whitmore continued, his voice rising with authority, I'm fining you $500 for wearing unauthorized military decorations in a civilian court proceeding. Remove that medal immediately or face additional penalties. The courtroom fell silent except for the soft ticking of the wall clock and the barely audible whispers of shocked spectators. Marcus looked down at his Bronze Star, remembering the day he earned it and the brothers in arms who didn't make it home. Then he looked back at Judge Whitmore, seeing not just one prejudiced man, but a system that needed to be challenged by people brave enough to stand up for what was right. Marcus Williams stood motionless in the suffocating silence of courtroom 3B, his fingers instinctively moving toward the Bronze Star on his chest. The weight of Judge Whitmore's demand hung in the air like smoke from a battlefield, and every person in the gallery held their breath waiting to see what would happen next. Your Honor, Marcus said with measured precision, this medal was awarded to me by the United States Army for actions above and beyond the call of duty. I have every legal right to wear it as part of my military dress uniform, which I am authorized to wear during official proceedings. Judge Whitmore's face reddened with anger as he realized this young veteran was not going to comply with his illegal order. 23 years on the bench had taught him that most people would crumble under his authority. But Marcus Williams was proving to be different from the usual defendants who appeared before him. Mr. Williams, the judge snarled, you are testing my patience and the dignity of this court. I will not have some wannabe hero disrupting my proceedings with military theatrics. Remove that medal or I will hold you in contempt and have the bailiff remove it for you. The bailiff, Deputy Sheriff Collins, shifted uncomfortably near the side door. A veteran himself from the Gulf War, Collins recognized the Bronze Star and understood its significance. His own service medals were displayed proudly in his home, and the thought of forcibly removing another veteran's earned decorations made his stomach turn with disgust. Marcus opened his briefcase and withdrew a thick folder of documents. His movements were deliberate and confident, causing several people in the gallery to lean forward with curiosity. Sarah watched her brother with growing amazement, seeing a side of him she had never witnessed during his quiet months back home. Your Honor, Marcus continued, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had studied law extensively, I direct your attention to United States Code Title 10, Section 771, which specifically authorizes military personnel and veterans to wear their uniforms and decorations during appropriate civilian functions, including court proceedings. Judge Whitmore's expression shifted from anger to confusion as he realized this defendant was quoting federal law with disturbing accuracy. In his 2 decades on the bench, few attorneys had challenged him so directly, and certainly no pro se defendant had ever cited specific legal codes during contempt proceedings. Furthermore, Marcus continued, pulling another document from his folder, the Supreme Court case of Cohen versus California established that symbolic expression, including the wearing of military decorations, is protected speech under the First Amendment. Any attempt to compel removal of lawfully worn military honors would constitute a violation of my constitutional rights. The courtroom erupted in whispers as spectators realized they were witnessing something extraordinary. Mrs. Henderson nudged the woman sitting next to her, both of them amazed at hearing such legal knowledge from someone they had known as the quiet young man who helped elderly neighbors with their groceries. Officer Bradley, who had been smirking from the back of the courtroom, now wore a concerned frown as he watched Marcus systematically dismantle the judge's authority with legal precision. This was not going according to plan, and Bradley began to worry about where this confrontation might lead. Judge Whitmore fumbled through papers on his desk, clearly rattled by the unexpected legal challenge. He had built his reputation on intimidating defendants into submission, but Marcus Williams was turning the tables by demonstrating superior knowledge of the law than the judge himself possessed. "Mr. Williams," Judge Whitmore said, attempting to regain control, "I don't care what fancy legal terms you think you know. This is my courtroom, and I decide what is and isn't appropriate attire." Marcus smiled slightly, the same calm expression he had worn while defusing explosive devices in Afghanistan. Pressure situations had taught him to think clearly when others lost their composure, and this moment required all of his training and education working together. "Your Honor," Marcus replied, "while you certainly have authority over courtroom procedures, that authority cannot supersede federal law or constitutional protections. I would also like to point out that your attempt to fine me for wearing lawfully authorized military decorations could constitute judicial misconduct under Canon 2 of the Code of Judicial Conduct." The words hung in the air like an accusation that changed everything in the room. Several attorneys in the gallery sat up straighter, recognizing the serious implications of what Marcus had just suggested. Judicial misconduct was not a charge made lightly, and the fact that this young veteran was invoking it showed he understood exactly what legal ground he was standing on. Judge Whitmore's hands trembled slightly as he reached for his water glass. In 23 years, no one had ever accused him of misconduct in open court, and the public nature of this challenge threatened everything he had built in his legal career. "Are you threatening me, Mr. Williams?" Judge Whitmore asked, his voice now showing uncertainty rather than authority. "No, Your Honor," Marcus replied calmly. "I am educating the court about the legal standards that govern these proceedings. As an officer of the court myself, I have an obligation to ensure that constitutional protections are upheld." The words, "officer of the court," sent another wave of confusion through the courtroom. Sarah looked at her brother with wide eyes, suddenly realizing that Marcus had been keeping secrets about his education and qualifications that were now being revealed under the most dramatic circumstances possible. Jerome, who had been silent throughout the proceeding, watched his uncle with growing admiration. The same man who had quietly helped him with homework and taught him how to change a tire was now standing up to the most powerful person in their community's legal system. Marcus reached into his briefcase once more and withdrew a leather portfolio that several attorneys in the gallery recognized immediately. It was the type of credential case that lawyers carried their bar admission certificates in, and its appearance in Marcus's hands suggested revelations that no one in the courtroom was prepared for. "Your Honor," Marcus said, opening the portfolio. With deliberate ceremony, "I believe there has been a fundamental misunderstanding about the nature of these proceedings. You seem to be under the impression that I am appearing before you as a pro se defendant without legal representation." Judge Whitmore leaned forward on his bench, his eyes focusing on the documents Marcus was removing from the portfolio. The courtroom fell completely silent as everyone strained to see what would happen next. "However," Marcus continued, his voice carrying new authority that commanded attention from every person present, "I should clarify that I am appearing before you as both the complainant in this civil rights violation case and as licensed legal counsel representing my own interests in this matter." The revelation hit the courtroom like lightning striking during a thunderstorm, illuminating everything in a harsh new light that revealed how drastically the situation had changed in mere moments. The leather portfolio opened with a soft creak that seemed to echo through the stunned silence of courtroom 3B. Marcus Williams withdrew his bar admission certificate, the official document that would transform him from a defendant to be dismissed into a legal adversary to be respected and feared. "I am Marcus Williams, Esquire," he announced, his voice carrying the weight of hard-earned authority. "Licensed to practice law in this state as of 18 months ago, and admitted to practice before the federal district court as of 6 months ago. I completed my Juris Doctor degree through distance learning while serving overseas, and I passed the bar examination on my first attempt with honors." Judge Whitmore's face drained of color as the implications of this revelation crashed over him like a tidal wave. Every word he had spoken, every ruling he had made, every contemptuous gesture had been witnessed and recorded by someone who possessed the legal knowledge to challenge his actions through proper channels. The gallery erupted in amazed whispers, as neighbors who had known Marcus since childhood struggled to process this incredible transformation. Mrs. Henderson shook her head in wonder, remembering how she had worried about the quiet young veteran who seemed to spend all his time reading thick books that she now realized had been legal textbooks. Sarah grabbed Jerome's arm, tears streaming down her face as she finally understood why her brother had been so confident about pursuing this case against seemingly impossible odds. The man she thought was struggling to adjust to civilian life had actually been preparing for this moment through years of disciplined study and legal preparation. "Your Honor," Marcus continued, placing his bar certificate on the defendant's table where everyone could see it, "I move for immediate dismissal of the contempt charge, as it was based on judicial misconduct and a clear violation of my First Amendment rights. I also move for sanctions against this court for attempting to suppress lawful expression of military service through intimidation and illegal orders." Judge Whitmore fumbled with his reading glasses, desperately trying to examine the bar certificate while maintaining some semblance of authority. The document was legitimate, issued by the State Bar Association with all the proper seals and signatures that confirmed Marcus Williams was indeed a licensed attorney in good standing. "Furthermore," Marcus said, his voice growing stronger as he gained momentum, "I am filing a formal complaint with the State Judicial Conduct Board regarding Your Honor's attempt to violate federal law by ordering the removal of lawfully worn military decorations. Such actions constitute clear evidence of bias, prejudice, and misconduct that undermines the integrity of these proceedings." Deputy Sheriff Collins watched from his position near the door, amazed at the complete reversal of power that was unfolding before his eyes. He had served papers on dozens of attorneys over the years, but he had never seen one emerge from apparent defeat with such devastating effectiveness. Officer Bradley shifted nervously in the back row, realizing that his simple, excessive force case had exploded into something far more dangerous. He had expected Judge Whitmore to dismiss this complaint quickly and quietly, but now they were facing a legal challenge from someone who clearly understood how to navigate the system. Marcus opened his briefcase and withdrew a stack of additional documents that seemed to grow thicker with each page he revealed. "Your Honor, I have prepared comprehensive documentation of the pattern of judicial bias and misconduct that has characterized these proceedings from their inception." Judge Whitmore's hands shook as he reached for his gavel, but Marcus raised his hand in a gesture that commanded attention and respect. "I would advise Your Honor to consider your next actions very carefully, as they will be subject to review by higher courts and judicial oversight committees." The weight of that warning settled over the courtroom like a heavy blanket. Everyone present understood they were witnessing a pivotal moment that would be remembered and discussed in their community for years to come. "Your Honor," Marcus continued, his voice now carrying the full authority of his legal training and military experience, "I present to the court documented evidence of discriminatory sentencing patterns, constitutional violations, and procedural irregularities that have characterized this courtroom over the past 5 years." He placed a thick folder on the table, its contents representing months of careful research and legal analysis that had been conducted while the community thought he was simply struggling with post-military adjustment. Instead, he had been building a case that would expose systemic injustice and demand accountability from those who had abused their power. The evidence includes statistical analysis of sentencing disparities based on race, documentation of procedural violations during arraignments, and witness testimony regarding judicial bias in civil rights cases. Marcus explained, his presentation as precise as a military briefing. Judge Whitmore's breathing became labored as he realized the scope of what Marcus had prepared. This was not a simple complaint about one incident, but a comprehensive legal assault on his entire judicial record that could end his career and destroy his reputation. "Mr. Williams," Judge Whitmore said weakly, "perhaps we should schedule another hearing to properly review these materials." His voice had lost all traces of the authority and intimidation that had defined his courtroom presence for over 2 decades. "Your Honor," Marcus replied with a slight smile, "I believe immediate action is required given the severity of the constitutional violations that have occurred during today's proceedings alone. I am requesting emergency intervention from the State Supreme Court to review your conduct and consider temporary suspension of your judicial authority, pending investigation." The words hit Judge Whitmore like physical blows, each legal term precisely chosen to maximize impact while maintaining perfect procedural correctness. Marcus had learned from military service that the most effective attacks combined overwhelming force with flawless execution. Mrs. Henderson whispered to her companion, "That boy has been planning this for months. Look how prepared he is for everything the judge tries to throw at him." Her admiration was shared by everyone in the gallery who was beginning to understand the brilliant strategy they were witnessing. Marcus gathered his documents with military precision, each movement calculated, to demonstrate his complete control over the situation. "Your Honor, I am also notifying you that I am recording these proceedings for evidence preservation, as is my right under state sunshine laws and federal court reporting requirements." Judge Whitmore's eyes widened as he realized that every word, every gesture, and every illegal order had been preserved for review by higher authorities, who would not be impressed by his attempts to intimidate a decorated veteran and licensed attorney. "The recording will be submitted to the appropriate oversight committees along with my formal complaints regarding judicial misconduct, constitutional violations, and abuse of authority," Marcus continued, his voice steady and professional despite the magnitude of what he was accomplishing. The transformation was complete. The quiet veteran who had been dismissed as a troublemaker had revealed himself to be a formidable legal adversary who had been gathering evidence and building his case, while everyone underestimated his capabilities and intentions. The silence in courtroom 3B stretched like a taut wire ready to snap as Judge Whitmore stared at the overwhelming evidence spread across Marcus Williams's table. 23 years of judicial authority were crumbling before his eyes, and every person in the gallery could see the fear replacing his earlier arrogance. "Your Honor," Marcus said, his voice cutting through the tension with surgical precision, "I believe it would be in everyone's best interest if we addressed the original civil rights complaint that brought us here today. The excessive force complaint against Officer Bradley and the pattern of harassment targeting young black men in this community." Officer Bradley stood up abruptly from the back row, his face flushed with anger and desperation. "This is ridiculous. That punk Jerome was resisting arrest and I used appropriate force to subdue a suspected criminal." Marcus turned slowly to face the officer, his military bearing commanding attention from everyone present. "Officer Bradley, I appreciate you volunteering to testify under oath about your version of events. However, I should inform you that perjury is a felony, and I have video evidence that contradicts your statement." The officer's face went pale as Marcus reached into his briefcase and withdrew a tablet computer. The device seemed to glow with importance as he powered it on, revealing security camera footage that had been carefully enhanced and analyzed over the past several months. "This footage," Marcus announced, "was obtained from the security camera at Henderson's corner store, located directly across from where Officer Bradley encountered my nephew Jerome. Mrs. Henderson graciously provided access to her surveillance system after witnessing the incident herself." Mrs. Henderson nodded firmly from the gallery, her earlier nervousness replaced by determined support for justice. She had been afraid to speak out against Officer Bradley initially, but Marcus's courage had inspired her to come forward with crucial evidence. Marcus connected his tablet to the courtroom's display system, a capability he had researched and prepared for during his months of case preparation. The large screen illuminated with clear video footage showing Jerome walking peacefully down the sidewalk with his basketball under his arm. "As you can see," Marcus narrated, his voice taking on the tone of an experienced prosecutor, Jerome Williams is walking normally, showing no signs of suspicious behavior or criminal activity. He is 17 years old, an honor roll student, and was returning home from basketball practice at the community center. The footage continued, showing Officer Bradley's patrol car pulling up aggressively beside Jerome. The young man's body language immediately showed confusion and fear as the officer exited his vehicle with obvious aggression and hostility. Note the timestamp. Marcus pointed to the corner of the screen. This encounter begins at 6:47 p.m. on a Tuesday evening. Jerome is walking in his own neighborhood on a public sidewalk engaged in lawful activity. There is no probable cause for this stop. Judge Whitmore watched the screen with growing discomfort, realizing that his usual practice of accepting police testimony without question was being systematically dismantled by objective evidence that could not be dismissed or ignored. The video showed Officer Bradley grabbing Jerome roughly and forcing him against the patrol car without any apparent provocation. The young man's hands went up immediately in a gesture of surrender, but the officer continued his aggressive handling, culminating in Jerome being slammed face first into the hood of the car. The audio enhancement, Marcus continued, adjusting the tablet's settings, reveals Officer Bradley using racial slurs and threatening additional violence if Jerome reported the incident. I have provided transcripts to the court and will be submitting copies to the Department of Justice for federal civil rights investigation. Officer Bradley jumped to his feet, his voice cracking with desperation. That video doesn't show everything. He was acting suspicious, reaching for something in his pocket. Marcus paused the video at the exact moment Bradley claimed Jerome was reaching for something. The enhanced footage clearly showed the teenager's hands visible and empty throughout the entire encounter, completely contradicting the officer's testimony. Officer Bradley, Marcus said with devastating calm, you have just committed perjury in open court. The video evidence proves that Jerome's hands were visible at all times and that he was not reaching for any object or weapon. The courtroom buzzed with shocked whispers as spectators realized they were witnessing not just one case being exposed, but potentially years of false police reports and manufactured evidence that had sent innocent people to jail. Marcus advanced the video to show the aftermath of the encounter, including Jerome's visible injuries and Officer Bradley's failure to call for medical assistance despite the young man's obvious distress and bleeding from facial lacerations. The medical records, Marcus continued, producing another set of documents, show that Jerome sustained a broken nose, 2 loose teeth, and severe bruising consistent with excessive force. The emergency room physician who treated him has provided an affidavit stating that these injuries could not have resulted from Jerome's alleged resistance, as claimed in Officer Bradley's report. Judge Whitmore's breathing became increasingly labored as he watched his carefully constructed system of injustice being methodically dismantled by an opponent who had prepared for every possible angle and contingency. Furthermore, Marcus announced, this case is not isolated. I have documented 14 similar incidents over the past 2 years involving Officer Bradley and young black males in our community. Each case followed the same pattern: aggressive stops without probable cause, excessive force, false charges, and judicial bias in favor of police testimony. He placed a thick folder on the table, its contents representing months of investigation and legal research that had uncovered a systematic pattern of civil rights violations that extended far beyond one officer or one incident. Your Honor, Marcus said, his voice carrying the full weight of his legal authority, I am requesting immediate suspension of Officer Bradley pending federal investigation, dismissal of all charges filed based on his testimony over the past 2 years, and appointment of a special prosecutor to review every case he has been involved with. The magnitude of what Marcus was requesting hit the courtroom like an earthquake. He was not just challenging one incident, but demanding a complete overhaul of the local justice system and accountability for years of systematic abuse. Officer Bradley looked desperately toward Judge Whitmore for support, but found only a man whose own career was hanging by a thread and who could no longer provide protection from the consequences of their shared misconduct. Your Honor, Marcus continued relentlessly, I am also filing formal complaints with the State Attorney General, the FBI's Civil Rights Division, and the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division. Federal investigators will be reviewing every Case handled by this court and this police department over the past 5 years. The words echoed through the courtroom like thunder, announcing the arrival of a storm that would reshape their community's understanding of justice and accountability. Marcus Williams had not just defended himself and his nephew, but had launched a comprehensive legal campaign that would expose and correct years of systemic injustice. Judge Whitmore gripped his gavel with white knuckles, realizing that his next words would either begin the process of redemption or complete his destruction as a jurist who had failed to uphold the very principles he had sworn to protect. Judge Harrison Whitmore sat frozen behind his bench, the weight of Marcus Williams's evidence crushing down on him like the walls of a collapsing building. The gavel in his trembling hand felt heavier than lead as he stared at the video footage that had just destroyed any hope of maintaining his facade of judicial integrity. "Your Honor," Marcus said, his voice now carrying the authority of inevitable victory, "I believe the evidence speaks clearly about the constitutional violations and systematic abuse that have characterized this jurisdiction. However, I want to give you an opportunity to demonstrate that justice can still prevail in this courtroom." The offer hung in the air like an extended hand to a drowning man, and everyone present understood that Marcus was providing Judge Whitmore with a chance at redemption that he had never offered to any defendant who had appeared before him. Marcus walked to the center of the courtroom, positioning himself where both the judge and gallery could see him clearly. His bronze star caught the fluorescent light, reminding everyone of the service and sacrifice that had brought him to this moment of truth. "I am prepared to withdraw my judicial misconduct complaint," Marcus announced, causing gasps throughout the gallery. "If Your Honor demonstrates a commitment to justice by taking immediate corrective action in this case and implementing reforms to prevent future violations." Judge Whitmore's eyes widened with desperate hope, recognizing that Marcus was offering him a lifeline that could save his career and reputation if he had the wisdom and courage to accept it gracefully. "What would you require?" Judge Whitmore asked, his voice barely above a whisper, all traces of his earlier arrogance replaced by humble recognition of his precarious position. Marcus opened another folder, revealing a typed document that he had clearly prepared in advance for exactly this scenario. His legal strategy had accounted for every possible outcome, including the possibility that Judge Whitmore might choose redemption over destruction. "First," Marcus began, reading from his prepared list, "immediate dismissal of all charges against Jerome Williams with prejudice and expungement of all records related to this case. My nephew has suffered enough trauma without having a false arrest record following him through life." Judge Whitmore nodded quickly, reaching for his pen to begin signing the necessary orders. The relief on Jerome's face was visible throughout the courtroom as he realized his future would not be damaged by Officer Bradley's lies and aggression. "Second," Marcus continued, "establishment of a civilian review board with real authority to investigate police misconduct complaints, including subpoena power and the ability to recommend disciplinary action up to and including termination." This requirement struck deeper at the heart of the local power structure, but Judge Whitmore recognized that meaningful reform was the only path toward restoring credibility to his courtroom and jurisdiction. Third, mandatory body cameras for all police officers with severe penalties for any officer who fails to activate recording equipment during citizen encounters. No testimony from officers without corresponding video evidence will be accepted in future cases. Officer Bradley slumped in his seat, understanding that his days of filing false reports and using excessive force without consequences were permanently over. The technological accountability that Marcus was demanding would prevent future victims from suffering the same abuse. Fourth, Marcus continued, his voice gaining strength as he outlined his vision for justice, implementation of implicit bias training for all court personnel, police officers, and judicial staff, conducted by qualified professionals with expertise in civil rights and constitutional law. Mrs. Henderson smiled from the gallery, recognizing that Marcus was not seeking revenge but genuine reform that would protect all members of their community from the prejudice and abuse that had gone unchecked for too many years. Fifth, establishment of a legal aid clinic to provide free representation for citizens who cannot afford attorneys when facing charges or civil rights violations. No one should face the power of the state without competent legal counsel. The proposal demonstrated Marcus's understanding that his own legal education and military benefits had given him advantages that most community members lacked when confronting systematic injustice in their local courts. Finally, Marcus concluded, I require your honor to issue a formal apology to my nephew Jerome, to acknowledge the harm caused by this court's failure to protect his constitutional rights, and to commit publicly to upholding equal justice under law for all citizens regardless of race, economic status, or social position. The final requirement struck at the heart of judicial pride and ego, asking Judge Whitmore to admit publicly that he had failed in his most fundamental duty as a jurist, sworn to protect constitutional rights. Judge Whitmore sat silently for several minutes, the courtroom holding its collective breath as he weighed his options and considered the consequences of either accepting or rejecting Marcus's offer of redemption through reform. Mr. Williams, Judge Whitmore finally said, his voice carrying new humility and respect, your terms are reasonable and necessary. I accept your proposal and commit to implementing these reforms immediately. He turned toward Jerome, who was sitting wide-eyed beside his mother, still processing the incredible events he had witnessed. Jerome Williams, Judge Whitmore said, his voice trembling with emotion, I apologize to you and your family for the injustice you have suffered in my courtroom. You deserve protection under the law, and I failed to provide that protection. I promise to do better. The apology echoed through the courtroom like a bell tolling the end of one era and the beginning of another. Several people in the gallery wiped away tears as they witnessed something many had never expected to see, genuine accountability from those in power. Marcus nodded respectfully, then approached the bench with a final document. Your Honor, this is a consent decree outlining the specific timelines and benchmarks for implementing these reforms. It includes oversight provisions and quarterly reports to ensure compliance. As Judge Whitmore signed the decree, the sound of his pen scratching across paper seemed to write a new chapter in their community's pursuit of justice. The quiet veteran who had been underestimated and dismissed had transformed their entire legal system through courage, preparation, and unwavering commitment to what was right. Sarah Williams looked at her brother with tears of pride streaming down her face, finally understanding that his months of quiet study and preparation had been building toward this moment when he would stand up not just for his family, but for every person who had been denied justice in their community. The bronze star on Marcus's chest seemed to shine brighter as he gathered his papers, having earned a different kind of medal in the civilian world where battles were fought with law books instead of weapons, but where victory still required the same courage and dedication that had carried him through combat zones overseas. 6 months after that transformative day in courtroom 3B, Millfield had become a different community entirely. Marcus Williams stood in his newly opened law office, watching through his window as the first meeting of the Civilian Review Board concluded across the street at City Hall. The changes he had demanded were not just promises on paper, but living realities that were reshaping how justice operated in their small town. The bronze nameplate on his office door read, Marcus Williams, Attorney at Law, Civil Rights and Criminal Defense. But the community had come to know him simply as the lawyer who cared enough to fight for everyone, regardless of their ability to pay or their position in society. Jerome walked through the office door, his backpack heavy with college applications and scholarship forms. The young man who had once been terrorized by a corrupt officer was now headed to law school himself, inspired by watching his uncle transform their community through courage and legal expertise. Uncle Marcus, Jerome said, settling into the chair across from the desk where his uncle had spent countless hours preparing cases for citizens who had never before had access to quality legal representation. Mrs. Rodriguez wants to know if you can help her son with his case. The new officer tried to search his car without permission yesterday. Marcus smiled, noting how different this conversation was from the fearful whispers that had characterized police encounters just months earlier. Now citizens understood their rights and knew they had someone willing to defend those rights in court. Tell Mrs. Rodriguez to bring her son in tomorrow morning, Marcus replied, making a note in his appointment book. And remind him to keep the body camera footage request I taught the community center kids about. Officer Johnson is still learning that accountability applies to everyone wearing a badge. The reforms had not been easy to implement. Officer Bradley had resigned rather than face federal investigation, and 2 other officers had been transferred after body camera footage revealed patterns of misconduct that could no longer be hidden. But the new chief, a veteran from a neighboring county with a strong record on community policing, had embraced the changes as an opportunity to rebuild trust. Judge Whitmore appeared in the office doorway, looking older, but somehow more dignified than he had during those dark days when fear and prejudice had ruled his courtroom. The quarterly meetings with Marcus had become collaborative sessions focused on improving justice, rather than confrontational battles over constitutional violations. "Marcus," Judge Whitmore said, removing his hat respectfully, "I wanted to personally thank you for the legal aid clinic proposal. We've helped 37 families this quarter, and I've seen the difference it makes when people have competent representation." The relationship between the 2 men had evolved from adversarial to professional respect, built on Judge Whitmore's genuine commitment to the reforms he had agreed to implement. The change had not been easy for a man set in his ways, but the results spoke for themselves in reduced recidivism, increased community trust, and a courtroom where justice was truly blind. "The state Supreme Court is considering adopting our model statewide," Judge Whitmore continued, his voice carrying pride in their shared accomplishment. "They want us to present our results at the annual judicial conference next month." Marcus nodded, pleased that their local reforms were gaining attention as a model for other communities struggling with similar issues of systemic bias and constitutional violations. The legal articles he had published about their experience were being cited by reform advocates across the country. Mrs. Henderson knocked on the open door, carrying a tray of fresh cookies that had become her weekly tradition since Marcus had opened his practice. The elderly woman who had once been afraid to speak out against injustice had become one of the most vocal advocates for community involvement in police oversight. "I brought snacks for your strategy meeting," she announced, setting the tray on the conference table where Marcus met with other attorneys who had joined his practice. The law firm had grown to include 2 other lawyers dedicated to civil rights work, and they were training local paralegals to expand access to legal services. "The review board meeting went well," Mrs. Henderson reported, settling into her favorite chair where she often shared community concerns that needed legal attention. "We reviewed 8 cases this month, and only 1 required formal disciplinary action. The body cameras are making a real difference in officer behavior." Marcus reflected on how dramatically their community had changed when transparency replaced secrecy and accountability replaced immunity. The body camera footage had initially revealed several incidents requiring intervention, but as officers adapted to constant recording, their behavior had improved significantly. Jerome looked up from his college applications, his face bright with excitement about his future. "Uncle Marcus, I've been thinking about what you said about using the law to help people. I want to focus on juvenile justice when I get to law school. Too many kids like me don't have anyone to fight for them." The pride in Marcus's eyes was unmistakable as he watched his nephew channel his traumatic experience into motivation for protecting other young people. Jerome's testimony before the state legislature about police reform had been powerful enough to influence statewide policy changes. Sarah Williams appeared in the doorway, having finished her shift at the hospital where she worked as a nurse. The worry lines that had aged her face during the months of harassment and intimidation had been replaced by laugh lines and the confidence that came from living in a community where justice was no longer a privilege reserved for the wealthy and connected. "How was court today?" she asked, kissing her son's forehead before settling beside Judge Whitmore, who had become an unexpected family friend through their shared commitment to reform. "3 cases," Marcus replied, updating the family scoreboard they maintained of legal victories for community members. "All resolved favorably. The body camera footage made the difference in each case. Officers are finally learning that their testimony needs to match the video evidence." The bronze star still hung prominently on Marcus's office wall, but it was now accompanied by commendations from civil rights organizations, thank you letters from grateful clients, and photographs of community events celebrating their transformation from a place where justice was denied to a model of how communities could police themselves fairly. As evening approached, and the office began to empty, Marcus sat alone with Deu. His thoughts looking out at the courthouse where his confrontation with Judge Whitmore had changed everything. The building looked the same, but the justice dispensed inside had been fundamentally transformed through one man's courage to stand up against a system that seemed impossible to change. His phone buzzed with a text message from a community organizer in another state who had read about their reforms and wanted guidance on implementing similar changes. Marcus smiled, realizing that their local victory was becoming a beacon of hope for other communities struggling with the same issues they had overcome. The quiet veteran, who had once been dismissed as a troublemaker, had discovered that the most important battles were not always fought on foreign battlefields, but sometimes in courtrooms where constitutional principles hung in the balance, and where ordinary citizens needed someone brave enough to demand that America live up to its founding promise of equal justice under law. Outside his window, the American flag flew over a courthouse where that promise was no longer just words carved in stone, but a living reality that protected every citizen regardless of their race, economic status, or position in society. Marcus Williams had earned his Bronze Star in Afghanistan, but his greatest victory had been won in Millfield, where he had transformed a community through the power of law, courage, and an unwavering commitment to justice for all.